Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine settling in for a movie, right? But it's not just, a 2 hour escape. This is an experience. It demands your full physical, your mental presence for hours, sometimes like an entire workday. And what if this whole unique film journey wasn't just designed to entertain you, but maybe to make you really feel the profound weight of a nation's history, its deep-seated traumas? Today, we are taking a deep dive into the extraordinary world of Filipino filmmaker Lav Diaz. He's often called a master of slow cinema,
Mhm.
and maybe more specifically, a pioneer in what some are calling post-trauma cinema. It's quite a label.
Yeah, it really is. And our mission today, I think, is to explore how Diaz actually crafts these incredibly long films. They're often nonlinear too. It's not just for show, right? He uses these aesthetics of absence and duration, you could call them. They're like fundamental tools to tell a history that's often been silenced, overlooked, maybe even deliberately buried. Through these techniques, he really wants to immerse us, directly into this complex, lingering condition of post-trauma in the Philippines. So we're going to try to dissect the core reasons why his films are made like this, and crucially, what powerful insights they might offer us about, well, collective memory, societal loss, and maybe that really difficult process of healing.
Okay, so to guide us through this, we've got a really fascinating academic deep dive. It's an article called The Aesthetics of Absence and Duration in the Post-Trauma Cinema of Lav Diaz. Sounds pretty comprehensive. And we also have a shorter piece from the rolling tape, which gives a bit of primer on slow cinema generally. So our goal is really to pull out the most important nuggets, the key ideas from these, to help you grasp this really unique approach to filmmaking and, well, its profound impact. It sounds like it can be quite intense. So let's start with the basics then, because slow cinema, it can mean different things to different people, right? What exactly is it? And maybe more importantly, how does Lav Diaz take this whole idea and push it to, I don't know, a whole new level, almost confrontational, it feels like. So we hear slow in film, we might just think, oh, leisurely pacing. But this sounds like it's way, way more than that.
That's a really great distinction to make, yeah. Um, at its core, slow cinema is often seen as like a direct artistic response, almost a kind of protest, against the relentless speed, the acceleration of everyday life in our globalized neoliberal world. There's a scholar, Law Diaz, who talked about it as an expression of this widespread discontent, this feeling that everything's just too fast. It's also very accurately called durational film. That term really highlights its defining feature, the sheer length. It's a conscious slowing down.
And Diaz, like you said, takes this duration to an almost unbelievable extreme. We're not talking 2.5 hours. We're talking feature films that can stretch up to, what, 11 hours long? I mean,
Yeah.
that's longer than a full workday for a lot of people. This isn't passive viewing, is it? He seems quite clear about that.
Not at all. He's been very explicit about it. He actually said, quote, "You have to struggle yourself. You want to be part of it, then struggle." The dynamic is you have to interact with it physically and mentally. So yeah, he's not just asking for your attention. He's demanding your active participation, your endurance even.
Right. It's part of a deliberate strategy, isn't it? To make you, the viewer, struggle, not just with the film, but maybe with yourself too.
Exactly. It really turns watching into this immersive, almost physical challenge. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And this extreme duration, it isn't just some random artistic choice either. It actually has deep cultural roots. The sheer length of his films is often inspired by traditional Filipino epic folktales, like Biag ni Lamang.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, Biag ni Lamang is this foundational Filipino epic poem. It tells the whole life story, the adventures of its hero. It was passed down orally for generations. And telling it, well, it takes a long time. So this shows Diaz's intention, to connect his modern filmmaking back to these ancient beliefs, these deep narrative forms of his culture. He's also aiming to embed Malay traditions into his films, grounding them in the region's own ways of storytelling, which are often long and sprawling.
Right. So it's not just about being slow. It's about restoring a different kind of time, a cultural time, maybe.
Precisely. It's a way of saying, look, this is how our stories have always been told, with patience, with breadth.
So what's the deeper why behind using time this way? Why make the viewer struggle?
That's really the crucial point, and it's where Diaz's work gets really interesting. A lot of current scholarship on slow cinema, it tends to focus mostly on the aesthetics, like how long the shots are, how the scenes unfold visually, but it often kind of neglects the deeper context.
But Diaz demands more.
Oh, absolutely. His films demand a much more thorough look, because that extended duration, it isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a profound statement. His films are really complex, multi-layered analyses of how the past, its influence, actually prevents Philippine society from moving forward. He's challenging way more than just cinematic time. He's challenging a whole nation's relationship with its own history.
Wow, okay.
Think about what one scholar, Kevin B. Lee, suggested. He said, slow cinema doesn't modify time. It restores the perception of time we usually have in life. That's a powerful idea, isn't it? In our, hyper-stimulated, constantly accelerating world, we often lose that natural rhythm of time.
Yeah, we're just bombarded. Quick cuts, fast stories.
Exactly. Instant gratification. Diaz actively pushes back against that. It's a real contrast to how some filmmakers feel, like Tsai Ming-liang. He's talked openly about the discomfort with the exceptionally fast pace of modern life, especially compared to his own upbringing in Malaysia, which he remembers as much slower. So Diaz is tapping into something really fundamental about how we experience time, and maybe how we should experience it, without that constant pressure to speed up.
So the length itself becomes a statement, almost a kind of activism.
You can definitely see it that way. This deliberate slowness, this extended time, it becomes a direct way of revealing and commemorating the anguish of history, as scholar Litz Kupnik put it. It's about digging up those sediments of grief, the ones that settle even in landscapes that seem ordinary, revealing the hidden layers of suffering.
So the landscape itself holds the trauma.
In a way, yes. It visualizes the paths of conflict, loss, antagonism that haunt every historical moment. So it's not just a slow story. It powerfully embodies things like paralysis, repetition, circularity. These are all characteristics that scholars often link to the non-representability of trauma, how trauma messes with time.
Right, because memory isn't always linear after something traumatic.
Exactly. It can feel like you're frozen, or repeating painful moments, or just circling back to something unresolved. Diaz makes you, the viewer, physically sit with that feeling, that loop, that stillness, that inability to move on. The duration itself becomes a kind of testimony. It forces you to confront a past that, for many, is still really raw and unaddressed.
So what does this all mean for you sitting down to watch one of these? Are you ready to just let go of your usual expectations, quick cuts, fast plots, and instead just immerse yourself completely in this different sense of time? It really asks us to rethink how we watch films, doesn't it? Moving from just consuming something passively to this active, almost meditative engagement. It sounds like it turns watching into a confrontation with your own patience, your own discomfort, and maybe ultimately your understanding of history and memory itself. Okay, so playing with time is deep. But here's where, for me, it gets really interesting. Diaz isn't just messing with duration. He's crafting this profound visual language that's all about absence. What does that actually look like on screen?
Right.
And why is absence so central to his view of post-trauma?
It's a fascinating concept, and you're right, this idea of absence, it's really a core condition of post-trauma itself.
Yeah.
It's always preceded by loss, right? Someone or something is gone, and it's often defined by what's not known or what's not said. Think about that power, the power of what's missing, what's unseen, unspoken.
So how does he show that?
Visually. He does it in really striking ways, often quite haunting.
Huh.
Take his film from 2007, Death in the Land of Encantos. Here, absence isn't abstract at all. It physically marks this landscape of death, especially after Typhoon Durian, called Remming locally, caused these devastating mudslides from Mount Mayon back in 2006. He uses real locations, not sets. And they starkly show where houses, farms, and people used to be. There is no longer a sign of life, just gone.
Wow.
And the camera often just lingers. It stays behind as characters move through these desolate areas. It emphasizes the soil over the sky. The ruined landscape often takes up like 2/3 of the frame. You see these vast, empty spaces where life used to be. And this feeling is powerfully captured in the film's poetry, too. There's a poem by Hamin, one of the characters, that illustrates this utter devastation. It talks about a vanished maiden, a once muddy place turned into a street. It really conveys the scale of loss, not just visually, but through words that speak of what's gone.
And it's not just physical absence, right? It's emotional, too.
Definitely. It extends into these deep psychological voids. In Melancholia, the 2008 film, the characters are grappling with this certain void. It results from kidnapping, disappearances. Their loved ones are just gone. Poof. And that leaves this agonizing lack of closure, of hope, any real explanation. This emptiness isn't just a plot point. It's like a pervasive presence. It shapes everything.
And how does he position people in these landscapes? You mentioned that was distinctive.
Yeah, especially in Encantos. Characters are often shown as these tiny, almost insignificant dots within these vast, overwhelming landscapes. And that's not by accident. It's a deliberate choice, reflecting ideas from traditional Chinese landscape painting, where nature is seen as the governing force, and humans are just guests within its immense power. It foregrounds nature over humanity.
What does that do for the viewer?
Well, it diminishes the human scale, right? It highlights these overwhelming forces at play, natural disaster, historical forces, and it also kind of shrinks the geographical distance between the filmmaker, the story, and you watching. It makes the experience feel more immediate, more universal somehow. You're drawn into the sheer immensity of the tragedy. You feel small within it.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these aesthetic choices, they're not just artistic, are they? They feel deeply psychological, like they're actually transmitting the character's anxiety, that feeling of being haunted.
Absolutely. Diaz isn't just depicting a state of being, he's actively trying to transmit it to you.
Hmm.
He masterfully generates uncertainty. For example, by exposing you, the viewer, to sounds from unknown sources. You hear things, whispers, maybe distant cries, unsettling scrapes, but you can't quite place them. You don't know where they're coming from.
Oh, that sounds unnerving.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this auditory ambiguity, it perfectly complements his nonlinear narratives. It powerfully transmits the character's anxiety, their fear, in the face of unseen oppression. It's a bit like techniques you might find in, say, a Bela Tarr film, where what you hear or you don't quite understand it can be much more terrifying than what you see right there on screen. It pulls you right into their psychological state.
And the physical spaces, the rooms they're in, how do they add to this?
The mise en scène, especially in Melancholia, can be incredibly suffocating. Interior spaces like these tiny hotel rooms, they're depicted as really confined, claustrophobic. And again, that's deliberate. It's designed to create an environment that supports the feeling of suffering, of despair. Emotions feel literally trapped in these small spaces, just like the characters feel trapped. Roofs are rarely shown in full, which makes them seem even smaller, more suffocating. But paradoxically, because they're so small, they sometimes have this air of intimacy.
But it's a false intimacy.
Kind of, yeah. Because it's immediately countered by the fact that the characters are almost always alone in these spaces. So it creates this profound sense of isolation instead. It's a stark contrast to, say, more open, maybe protected, private spaces you might see elsewhere in film. It just reinforces their vulnerability, their psychological confinement.
You mentioned time terror earlier. How does that fit in here?
It fits perfectly. This idea of time terror, or deformed time, resonates deeply with what Diaz shows. Imagine feeling an endless duration that's suddenly punctuated by sudden attacks and incursions. Or a world where a single day was longer than a week, or where a small time unit appeared endless. This profound disorientation of time, it's deeply embedded in the character's experiences. It mirrors the psychological reality of prolonged trauma or confinement. It's the kind of time sense people describe from concentration camps, where existence becomes this continuous, agonizing present moment.
That sounds incredibly unsettling, like being stuck in a time loop of trauma.
They often are. And it's frequently accompanied by this chilling presence of haunting, the uncanny, the perceived presence of ghosts, like Julian's wife in Melancholia, or Hammond's mother and lover in Encantos. It's not just a supernatural gimmick. It's a powerful sign of post-trauma, of what one scholar calls splintering time. And these ghost sightings, they often happen in those in-between spaces of the home. Doorways, windows, stairwells. It echoes traditional ghost stories, where the safe space becomes haunted.
Right, the home isn't safe anymore.
Exactly. Tom Gunning's term, phantasmatic, describes these images perfectly. They oscillate between visibility and invisibility, presence and absence. It reinforces how trauma is both elusive and persistent, the past literally bleeding into the present, refusing to be forgotten.
You mentioned a connection to concentration camps earlier, too.
Yes. The source material notes that Diaz's films create an atmosphere of post-trauma and terror that reminded the author of their own feelings visiting the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. There's this particular feeling you get in those places, a quiet, almost mundane backdrop to unimaginable horror. And that feeling, that borderland in which extremity and everydayness coexist, is what David Rousset called the concentrationary universe. This framework is really crucial for understanding how Diaz portrays suffering, not as some isolated dramatic event, but as an inescapable daily reality, where the mundane and the horrific are just tangled together. It's this pervasive sense of dread shaping everything.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How does this deliberate feeling of uncomfort, this deep unease, serve the story, serve the message? It's like the landscape, it's those vast empty spaces, those claustrophobic rooms, becomes a character in their trauma, bearing witness, reflecting their inner turmoil. You're not just watching a story, you're feeling its texture, its psychological weight. It's very effective, even if it is demanding. So we've looked at the time, the space, the aesthetics. Now let's really get into the human experience within these films. How do Diaz's characters actually grapple with this immense weight, the weight of their past, their present? This is where it gets really personal, right?
Absolutely. This is where the real emotional core is. In Melancholia, for example, we follow Alberta, Rena, and Julian. Their partners are desaparecidos, that's Spanish term for the disappeared ones, people kidnapped by military or government forces, never seen again. And this isn't just loss, it's this profound, open-ended grief. They're plunged into this constant state of terror, this fear of death, even for themselves.
And that fear is intentional, part of the oppression.
Exactly. That's the chilling function of state terror, as one scholar, Thomas Elsesser, pointed out. It's to create survivors and witnesses whom the act traumatizes. They don't necessarily have to kill everyone. The fear itself becomes the weapon. It's designed to paralyze individuals, paralyze society.
And their response to this trauma, it's quite something, isn't it? This immersion therapy.
It truly is extraordinary. These characters, they engage in what the source calls a self-devised immersion therapy. They're living in this limbo of the relatives, caught between hope and despair, not knowing if their loved ones are alive or dead. So to cope, they basically shed their true identities. They adopt fictional lives. It's like this radical form of role-playing. For instance, they take on roles like a prostitute, a nun, a pimp in this remote town called Sagada.
Why? What's the idea behind that?
Well, the idea, as Julian explains it, is that by going through this extreme, simulated experience of living a different, maybe even degraded life, they might somehow achieve a better, pain-free future, like they could somehow transcend the grief, the uncertainty that's just consumed them. It's a really desperate attempt to reset their lives.
And the look of melancholia, the black and white that plays into this.
Absolutely. The stark black and white isn't just style, it's deeply symbolic. It reminds you a bit of filmmakers like Bellatar, maybe his film The Man from London. It reinforces the characters' ambiguities. It visually puts them between light and darkness, between hope and despair. It manifests their double identities, their real selves, and these fictional personas they've adopted. And it signals this period of change they're desperately seeking. They're caught in this liminal, undefined space, visually mirroring their emotional limbo. It's a really powerful metaphor for their fractured existence.
Okay, then there's Florentina Hubaldo, CTE, from 2012. That film seems to focus very intensely on the physical and psychological trauma of one person.
It really does. It takes the idea of internal damage to another level. Florentina suffers from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. It's a degenerative brain disease. And tragically, it's a direct result of her father's horrific violence towards her. This includes forced abortions performed by another character, Miss Simang. The source mentions one instance where, horribly, the child had a crushed head. So her traumatic memories, they start to disappear. They become fragmented. This leads to this repetitive narrative structure in the film. She keeps trying to tell her story, but it's never all-encompassing. She can't quite grasp it fully, and neither can you, the viewer, which just adds to the film's unsettling power. It's a visceral depiction of how trauma literally breaks down the mind's ability to process, to narrate its own suffering.
And Florentina has these striking hallucinations, right? The giants.
Yes, exactly. Florentina's hallucinations, especially of these giants, which are these gigantic papier-mâché dolls from the real annual Higantes Festival in the Philippines, they're triggered by her CTE. For anyone unfamiliar, the Higantes Festival is this vibrant tradition, famous for these huge, often colorful figures paraded in the streets. But in Florentina's mind, they take on a different meaning. Diaz himself described using the giants, quote, with the idea of finding a god to save you, finding somebody to redeem you from all this torture. So these hallucinations, they become this crucial, if desperate, point of refuge for her. They're different from the hallucinations we see in Melancholia, which are more about terror or mourning, or those in Encantos, linked to trauma and guilt. Hers operate on what the source calls a trauma savior axis. They provide this fragile, imagined escape from her profound suffering, a lifeline maybe, in a shattered mind.
And then back in Death in the Land of Encantos, we have Jamin, the poet. His mental decline sounds terrifying. It's not just about past events, but his present state.
That's right. Hammond's decline seems to stem from this combination of overwhelming paranoia, fear of encountering potential killers, and just this profound fear for his own safety. And is coupled with this crushing realization that he and his fellow resistance fighters will probably, inevitably, be killed. His death drive, as the source puts it, heightens with every moment spent in the paralytic state of not knowing. that agonizing limbo again. He describes hearing a mysterious song persisting in memory, seeing a face from the past being glimpsed in his poetry. It highlights how haunted his mind is. It's a really powerful portrayal of a mind slowly unraveling under just unbearable pressure.
And there's this idea of the process of dying through silence.
Yes, that's a deeply unsettling aspect of Hammond's experience, and it resonates with many real-world survivors. He keeps silent about his torture. The source notes this is common survivor behavior. Why? Maybe to protect himself or protect others. Telling could feel like, well, one scholar described it as feeling like smearing the listener with feces, a sense of taboo. Or maybe his liberty literally depends on staying silent, given the real danger of state terror against artists and activists in the Philippines. But this silence, it implies this deeper psychological torture. Elaine Scory defined it as a process of dying. It leads to this slow, agonizing deterioration of his mental state. And chillingly, the source links this back to global psychological torture efforts, like those allegedly used by organizations such as the CIA, supposedly aimed at combating communist subversion. It's a truly harrowing portrayal of internal decay, the soul being slowly extinguished not by physical violence, but by enforced silence, by unspoken pain.
So this raises a big question, doesn't it? How does Diaz use these incredibly personal stories, these mental states, to reflect the bigger picture, the broader societal wounds? It feels like it's not just about individual suffering. It's about a collective trauma woven into society itself.
It's a profound connection he makes. Think about the children of the Desaparecidos. They inherit a void, an erasure, a catastrophe of meaning, as one scholar put it. Hannah, in Melancholia, she was only 8 when her parents disappeared. She doesn't seem to remember it directly, yet she feels this overwhelming need to learn everything about them. The intimate details, their political struggle. This void isn't just personal, it's a societal wound passed down generations, a legacy of unanswered questions, unresolved pain.
And Hammond's silence, that reflects a societal pressure too.
Exactly. His silence about his torture, as we discussed, it's a powerful example of survivor behavior shaped by external forces. Keeping silent to protect others, or because speaking out is literally dangerous due to state terror. This societal pressure to suppress truth is itself a form of ongoing trauma, makes healing incredibly difficult, maybe impossible for some.
You also mentioned the forest earlier. How does that play into this?
The forest motif is really significant across his films. It's both refuge and profound threat. In Florentina Hubaldo, Florentina runs into the forest to escape sexual violence. It's a literal sanctuary. And Renato, Hammond's activist husband in Melancholia, also seeks refuge in the woods. But at the same time, the forest is this place of extreme danger, where, as one resistance fighter described, men with guns whom we do not even see stalk us. The thickness of the woods creates this chilling visual absence of the enemy. It generates profound uncertainty. It becomes a place of psychological suffocation. It embodies that ever-present unseen threat in a society under oppressive rule.
And the boredom, you mentioned that word doesn't quite capture it.
Right. Diaz uses this lack of on-screen action and silence deliberately to unnerve you while simultaneously exploring the character's psychology. And while boredom might be the first word that comes to mind for some viewers, the German term Langeweile, literally long while, feels more accurate. As scholar Sun Young Seo suggests, Langeweile implies more than just boredom. It's a decline in excitement, a decline in vitality, and that perfectly mirrors the paralytic state of not knowing that traps Hammond, that prevents him from even wanting to live. It forces you, the viewer, into a similar state of unease, of deep, uncomfortable reflection. It really makes you feel the internal struggle.
You can really feel the visceral struggle of these characters, can't you? And it drives home how trauma isn't just an event, not something that happens and then it's over. It's this lingering, transforming condition. It shapes lives, changes minds, and as we're seeing, it leaves these deep, indelible marks on whole societies. It's a powerful reminder that some wounds, well, they take generations even to begin to heal. Okay, so we've dug into the individual trauma in Diaz's films, but these aren't just isolated stories, are they? They're deeply rooted in a national story. So why are these particular stories' trauma struggles so prevalent in his work? Let's zoom out a bit. Let's look at the bigger historical picture he seems to be painting, the immense weight of the past.
That's really where the political and social power of his cinema comes through. Diaz fundamentally makes Philippine history the focal point of his films. It's right there at the center. He's actively pushing back against the fading of memory. Much like other filmmakers from what's called third cinema, who use film to reclaim national narratives. His explicit goal is nothing less than the telling of a silenced history that has long been neglected in official teaching in the Philippines. He's using cinema as a historical corrective, you could say.
And that history, it's incredibly complex, isn't it? Starting way back with colonialism.
It's definitely multi-layered, and its impact is still felt. Think about the Spanish-American War. After Spain lost, America occupied the Philippines around the turn of the 20th century. And this change of occupational power, as the source puts it, led to many changes in culture and traditions, moving from a conservative Catholic view towards a more liberal American one. And crucially for this discussion, Hollywood films became a tremendous influence. Diaz himself noted that cinema was one of the imperialist tools the Americans brought with them when they effectively bought the Philippines from Spain.
So cinema itself was part of the colonization.
In a way, yes. It established this precedent of cinema as a vehicle for outside influence. Yet, interestingly, the themes of colonialism are also deeply rooted in early Philippine cinema itself. Filmmakers often chose to bash the old colonizers, meaning Spain. So there was already this precedent for using film to address historical oppression, to reclaim identity.
And then much more recently, there's the incredibly dark period of martial law under Ferdinand Marcos. What was it, 1965 to 86? That's not ancient history at all.
Not at all. Its shadows still stretch over the country today. That's a critical period. Under Marcos, the government used the armed forces and paramilitary groups who arrested and imprisoned more than 60,000 citizens. They harassed or even liquidated alleged subversives, journalists, activists, lawyers. Anyone seen as a threat could be arrested. It effectively turned the country into a prison in itself. Filipinos were even banned from traveling abroad. And this state-sponsored terrorism, this legacy of human rights abuses, it's still, according to the sources, remarkably ripe in the Philippines today, decades after Marcos fell. Its echoes profoundly impact society. It's a collective trauma that never really got resolved.
And these issues, the disappearances, the torture, they didn't just vanish when Marcos left power.
Unfortunately not. Torture, extrajudicial killings, they became widespread under Marcos, and they remain, according to the sources, a prime characteristic of the post-Marcos regimes too. Major organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have reported widespread and systematic torture by the security forces and the ongoing prominence of extrajudicial killings. And these target not just armed groups, but also legal critics of the government, artists, activists. It paints this picture of a nation still grappling with the echoes of a brutal, unaddressed past, a constant state of uncertainty and fear.
Which brings us back to that central theme, the disappearances. The desaparecidos.
Yes, it's agonizingly central, especially in Melancholia. The consistent fear of being kidnapped, tortured, and disappeared or killed, which is a horrifying reality for many. It keeps society and the individual in a state of paralysis, as one source describes it. This isn't just a vague threat. It's a living, breathing fear that permeates daily life. It creates this collective trauma that's constantly being renewed. How can you move forward when people just vanish without a trace?
So it's clear this isn't just about individual stories, it's about collective trauma. Diaz's work feels like a crucial lens, maybe an invaluable one, for understanding a history that's been suppressed or ignored.
Exactly. It's about remembering what's been forgotten, or maybe worse, deliberately erased. And art, in this context, it really functions as this powerful, almost essential healing device. As some scholars argue, art is frequently used as a healing device, either because the things that are explicitly said or because of the way in which it draws attention to what has been silenced.
Yeah.
And both of those are profoundly present in Diaz's work. He's intentionally yelling that silenced history, giving voice to the voiceless.
But you mentioned earlier, despite this incredibly rich, traumatic history, there's a surprising lack of scholarly attention to Philippine cinema, particularly in the West. Why is that?
It is perplexing. It's a real void. Despite everything we've discussed, Philippine cinema is largely absent from this landscape of scholarly work in film studies and post-trauma, especially in Western academia. Many existing books on Philippine history have tended to marginalize the effects of colonialism and dictatorship. Some even took a kind of pro-American stance that downplayed the suffering. So this gap makes Diaz's films even more crucial. They're not just films, they're vital historical documents. They fill a significant void in understanding, forcing a confrontation with uncomfortable truths.
And he confronts it directly sometimes. You mentioned footage of remains.
Yes, a profoundly powerful example is his inclusion of actual footage, a skull and bones in Melancholia. This isn't just cinematic shock value. It's a stark, almost archaeological act. It marks an end of uncertainty for the desaparecidos' relatives. It makes it undoubtedly clear that the disappeared were killed. It offers this brutal kind of closure. It's hauntingly similar to Patricia Guzman's famous documentary Nostalgia de la Luz, where mothers in Chile literally dig in the Atacama Desert for the remains of loved ones disappeared under Pinochet. Recovering the dead, even symbolically on screen, it's a way to start a therapeutic dealing with the past. It aids closure, validates grief, validates the search for truth.
So his filmmaking becomes a personal act of remembrance, too, and protest.
Precisely. Diaz connects deeply to the experiences of artists and activists who faced repression. He often uses factual material, specific names, political groups. For instance, he included a real newspaper article about the extrajudicial killing of his friend Alvarado, who led a leftist group. Diaz recounted, "That guy was a good friend of mine. He was shot by the military because he's the head of the Bayan group. Just because he was suspected of being a communist, they killed him. When they shot him, he was holding his baby." End quote. Diaz has said he lost many more friends to such killings. It makes his filmmaking not just art, but this deeply personal act of remembrance, of resistance, and a relentless pursuit of justice for those who were silenced.
And the theme of rape? How does that connect to history?
In Florentina Hubaldo, the suggested rape of Florentina is interpreted not just as individual abuse, but as this powerful, harrowing historical metaphor. It symbolizes colonial power and exploitation. It extends beyond the personal act to the broader conquest of land, of people. It serves as a historical tool used to undermine the enemy, demoralizing them by showing they can't protect their own families, as one scholar explains. It really highlights how deeply individual traumas are tangled up with broader historical injustices, how the personal reflects the political on a devastating scale.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that history isn't just dates and names in a book. It's these deeply ingrained, often agonizing experiences that shape a nation's psyche. And filmmakers like Diaz are actively ensuring these silent stories, these deeply felt histories, are brought into the light, forcing us to confront realities we might otherwise ignore or forget. It feels like a profound form of historical accountability through art. Okay, so we've talked about the brutal history Lav Diaz portrays, the immense suffering, the societal wounds. But what's truly remarkable and maybe controversial for some is how he chooses to show it, or rather how he chooses not to show it. He deliberately avoids graphic images of violence, torture, sex, even though these things are central to the experiences he's exploring. So why? Why this choice? What does it achieve? It's clearly not an oversight, right?
No, not at all. It's a very conscious aesthetic as well as an ethical choice, as scholar Libby Saxton notes. It's fundamental to his approach. He chooses to convey this brutality differently, through dialogue maybe, or sound design, or through that sheer weight of time and absence we've been discussing.
It sounds like what Saul Friedlander called distanced realism.
Exactly. It aligns very well with that idea, where reality is perceived through a filter. The filter of memory, maybe, or spatial displacement, or just this narrative margin which leaves the unsayable unsaid. It's about evoking the horror, rather than explicitly showing it. You're not shown the act, but you're made to feel its aftermath, its lingering presence. It's a way of representing the unrepresentable.
And a key reason for this approach is ethical, to avoid re-traumatizing people.
That seems to be a major factor, yes. For Diaz, and importantly for his audience in the Philippines, seeing graphic images of torture and killing could potentially re-traumatize Diaz and his people. So minimizing explicit imagery seems deeply based on responsibility and morality. It's a filmmaker holding a profound ethical vision, choosing carefully what to show and what to transmit through absence, maybe out of a deep sense of care for his community. He understands the power images have to heal or to harm and seems to prioritize healing and respect.
And there's an argument that showing everything might actually lessen the impact.
Exactly. There's this powerful idea suggested by Libby Saxton that explicit images of atrocity might actually shield us from the event itself. How? By replacing a traumatic absence with a redemptive presence. It means if you see everything, you might feel like you've seen it, you've understood the horror. When in fact, the true, maybe unfathomable nature of the trauma remains untouched, maybe even obscured by the graphic image. By not showing the violence directly, especially state-sponsored violence, the true horror retained its full, maybe ungraspable meaning. It becomes more powerful because you don't see it. Your mind is forced to engage with the idea of the horror, which can be far more disturbing, more enduring.
And this really stands out compared to a lot of what we might call popular trauma cinema.
It certainly does. One scholar, Michael Chick, suggests that many cinematic representations of atrocities, especially within industry frameworks, often aim more for entertainment, maybe even visual pleasure, rather than raw authenticity or deep ethical engagement with the trauma. Another scholar, Shohini Chaudhuri, implies that a truly ethical film must actively break with those classic conventions, disrupting that easy consumption. Diaz's choices feel like a direct challenge to that mainstream approach. He prioritizes ethical responsibility over conventional storytelling or visual spectacle.
Are there other films that use similar strategies?
Yeah, you can see parallels. Think of Ari Folman's animated film Waltz with Bashir. It uses animation for most of its depictions of violence. But then, right at the end, it abruptly shifts to harrowing, real-life documentary footage. It's a shock. Diaz's sudden insertion of that real footage, the skull and bones in Melancholia, has a similar kind of rupture and shock effect. It confronts you with brutal reality without depicting the act of violence itself. Or another Filipino film, Jet Laco's Leave It for Tomorrow, For Night Has Fallen, is mentioned as creating this rich work which transmits a feeling of horror, ghostliness, haunting, and terror, primarily through its aesthetic mix and suggestion, not explicit gore. It's a highly effective way to create that deep sense of dread.
So this raises a big question. What's the audience experience like when violence is suggested, not shown? And what does it even mean for a film to be unwatchable? I mean, for many, an 11-hour film is already unwatchable in a practical sense.
That's a brilliant point. Some scholars talk about a cinema of the unwatchable, or a cinema of lethargy, usually referring to films that confront viewers with overtly abject images, things that are physically repulsive or traumatizing to see. But the meaning of unwatchable in Diaz's context, it becomes this double-edged sword, as the source puts it. It extends beyond just the visually disgusting to encompass the profound psychological impact, and crucially the impact of what is not shown. It forces your mind to fill in the gaps, to imagine the horror. And that process can be far more profoundly unsettling, more unwatchable in a psychological sense than any explicit depiction. You become a co-creator of the terror in your own mind.
And sound plays a big role in this.
A huge role. Diaz really stresses the auditory aspects of post-trauma, especially in Florentina Hubaldo, CTE. As Alison Young argues, seeing is only one dimension of the spectator's relationship to the image. Just as important are hearing, feeling, remembering. This is why absolute silence becomes so prevalent and impactful in Florentina, especially when Florentina interacts with those giant figures. The sudden switch from sound to absolute silence is deeply disorientating for you, the viewer, because sound usually gives us a sense of time, it unifies images, gives flow.
Right, anchors you.
Exactly. So without it, time feels broken. Images feel like they're floating, disconnected. This sonic rupture, as the source calls it, transmits this chilling feeling of time terror. That phrase used by Avishai Morag for the psychological impact of ruptured time in trauma victims. It reinforces that concentrationary concept we discussed, creating disorientation for the victim and for you, the viewer, through this continuous unsettling shift in time, initiated by that endless duration, punctuated by sudden attacks and moments of jarring shock, like absolute silence. Think about it again. A small time unit appeared endless, an endless duration broken by sudden attacks where a single day was longer than a week. That's what selective sound and absolute silence can achieve. It's a profound psychological effect designed to make you feel the character's internal experience of their broken reality.
This technique really makes you work, doesn't it? It forces you to imagine, to confront the absence, to fill in the unspoken horrors. And for many, that feels like it could be even more profound, more enduring than just seeing everything laid bare. It truly makes the trauma felt, not just observed. Something that lingers long after the screen goes dark, really inviting deep reflection. #outro. So, wow. We've just taken a really deep dive into the extraordinary cinematic universe of Lav Diaz. It's often demanding, yes, but also profoundly rewarding, it sounds like. From his incredibly long films that challenge our whole perception of time to his really considered ethical choice to convey trauma through absence, through sound, rather than graphic images. We've seen how his films aren't just art, are they? They're vital historical documents, meticulously exploring these deep collective wounds of the Philippines.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating is how Diaz's work just masterfully bridges that gap between form and content. He pushes the boundaries of slow cinema way beyond just aesthetics to offer this profound, necessary investigation into the Filipino post-trauma psyche. His films actively defy our typical expectations of what cinema should be. They rigorously demand patience from you. They offer poignant testimony to histories that have been suppressed. And they force us, the viewers, to really grapple with a silenced past. They encourage us to confront that haunting absence of the past, making us active participants in understanding its ongoing, undeniable impact on the present. It's really an invitation to a deeper understanding, not just of the Philippines, but maybe of the human condition itself.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a film can be this immersive, this demanding, yet so deeply impactful by not showing the explicit horrors, but instead making us feel the enduring trauma through absence, through time. What other absences exist out there, in our own world maybe, in our own histories? Absences that might be waiting to reveal their truth. What hidden stories are just yearning to be heard, if only we take the time, maybe a lot of time, to truly look and listen, and allow ourselves to be profoundly affected by what isn't immediately obvious. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.